in verse 136, it says, "My eyes shed streams of tears because people do not keep your law." There, it seems that the reason the psalmist is upset is a concern for the Lord and for his priorities, and people are not living in conformity with that, and this is bad. Sometimes there can just be like, oh, I don't like what these people are doing. It aggravates me, or it makes my life harder. I know of a church down in Georgia, or just where I am. I'm talking like I don't live there, but some people that we went to college with went to this church. It was not there in Toccoa, but it was closer towards Atlanta. And someone told me they had a conversation with one of the elders, and it was really near the Mall of Georgia, which is a big, shopping area. And the guy commented that he wished he could blow up the Mall of Georgia with all those Sabbath breakers in there because of, they were dishonoring the Sabbath and dishonoring the Lord. I thought, I don't think that's quite the attitude we're after. Now, I don't. Maybe we have some Sabbatarian listeners. I don't think that Sunday is the Christian Sabbath. But regardless, I don't think that that's what we're after. And so you can just trying to, probe their heart and see what is it about that bothers them. But then if it is a godly sorrow over what people are doing, and there's a concern for the Lord and his reputation, teach them to turn that angst to prayer, to reach out to them, those kinds of things, and offer the assurance that one day God will handle things. He will make all things right, and so we can trust him in that.
Yeah, that's good. I think you're right to point out that being bothered by the world and being bothered by the behavior of the lost is kind of understandable. It's not completely bad that our children, our youth, might be uncomfortable with the way that lost people might behave in a way that is dishonoring to God, in a way that might be harmful of other people. So we can't condemn just those, our children and youth, that are uncomfortable with it and that come to us and say, what do I do about this? But we still have to, I think, teach them the mentality, I think, that 1 Corinthians teaches us, which is that we judge the church by God's standards, but we judge the world by a different set of standards. We don't expect the lost to behave as if they're Christians, but we do expect the Christians to behave as if they're Christians. So I think there needs to be an expectation, and there needs to be mercy to know that those who are not Christians are behaving according to their flesh. They're being governed by their flesh. They don't have the Holy Spirit living with them and them. So perhaps it might even urge in our children and youth a understanding that there by the grace of God legitimately go I, that perhaps I might be behaving even worse or behaving in a sin that might be more acceptable, but might nonetheless send my own soul to hell apart from God's glorious mercy. And there are times you clearly want to encourage children and youth when these lost people are behaving in a way that is damaging and dishonoring to God. Don't participate. And there are some times in which you do want to tell, whether it be the bus driver when you see things going on in the bus that aren't appropriate. Tell the principal, tell a parent, perhaps, if something might be clearly harmful to the children and youth involved. But at the same time, we don't want to be Pharisees. We want to teach our children and youth, don't approach them like Pharisees. Don't act like you're better than this or that person because you haven't done this or that act because of God's grace to you.
Mm. Yeah. We talked about the Christian Character Awards and a couple episodes ago, and how they were kind of like Pharisee awards. And I was at a setting where that was taking place, and I thought this child is getting the Christian Character Award for this, and I thought, well, I don't know that everyone that's receiving that's a Christian, but you deal with it.
Now, what do we say to the children or the youth who are being mocked or persecuted by the lost around them because of their faith in Jesus?
Well, I think you take them to what Jesus said, that they are blessed, that their reward is great in heaven, and that Jesus himself said they will hate you on my account. we're not greater than our master. And so Jesus went before us and bore that shame and scorn. And so he'll strengthen us to stand and even to be in more awe of him than we are of the world. But that there is a reward that awaits us as we stay faithful. Not, this antagonistic attitude, but just trying to be faithful and to love even in the midst of it, but to see Jesus as more compelling than the approval of others.
Yeah, that's right. I think this is a really relevant question. I think more and more today, in a world that is starting to give up on a lot of pretenses of being Christian, starting not even to bother by pretending that we're cultural Christians, this kind of rejection and persecution will happen more and more. And I think we need to prepare our children and youth for it. Children and youth to face an uphill battle if they profess Christ as Lord and Savior, if they profess to believe what the Bible teaches, even when it contrasts so sharply with the belief systems of our world around us. But I think they do, like you said, need to know that they stand with Jesus, that they are in wonderful company, not just with Jesus, but with even the apostles themselves. And in that setting, like with the apostles, the gospel becomes more beautiful when they endure that persecution. God is with them. God stands with them as they suffer and they are rejected. But God will use that suffering and that rejection to make the gospel look more beautiful when they're willing to turn the other cheek under persecution, when they're willing to love those who persecute them. And I think if we raise our children and youth to be willing to continue to present the gospel and continue to love in a way that our world doesn't even love when they're persecuted, I think that's going to bring a great revival to our churches. It's going to bring great revival of people being won to the Lord, because our churches, our children, our youth that claim to be Christians are going to look different, are going to act different, and are going to be willing to present the truth of the gospel when they're nothing like the world around them.
That's good.
How does our talk with Christian kids about the lost change as they get older?
Well, I think that they're going to need more wisdom and discernment, and we give them a longer leash as far as, especially if they've been a believer for longer. And, you talked about someone's lostness not, rubbing off. Now, there's an element where you are careful and you don't make, even if we want them to be intentional with their relationships with unbelievers, that we're not making the only kind of people they interact with unbelievers, but you are giving them more leeway and making those decisions while still staying involved. But I think, too, you're more frank about some of your conversations about the deeds of darkness and the reality of sin. They're becoming more aware of it and the temptations they're facing and the temptations they see their friends facing or falling to. And so you're able to talk about that and how the gospel addresses those things. And also, the gospel saves us from those things. And so it becomes more mature in those ways.
Yeah. I think when you have young children and you're trying to prepare them to reach out for the gospel, a lot of them ask a lot of big questions and hard questions that aren't always the most helpful thing to be answered directly. So if a young child comes and interacting with lost people sees that your neighbor John is not going to church on Sundays, he's always working on his lawn every Sunday morning, has no interest in things like that, and your little 4-year-old or 3-year-old asks you that, Mommy, Daddy, is John a Christian? I think it's probably not the most helpful thing to give a definitive answer, but instead tell them, for those who are, and tell them what a Christian is in a way that doesn't directly answer, is John a Christian? But when we start to have youth, when we have older children and youth, that might be a very direct thing. When our 14, 15-year-old asks, why is this person that claims to be a Christian acting this way? That is it really a Christian if you have no interest in seeking God's glory, or if I've been hearing this or that teacher that's saying something like the prosperity gospel. Is this really what Christianity is? Is this person really a Christian? And maybe at times, I think, with discretion, it can be more wise and can be helpful to actually give a biblical direct answer based upon the fruit that is in lives and based upon where that theology stands, so that they might better be able to make discernment themselves as they get older. With youth, you can also talk about lost worldview in non-dismissive ways. I don't think it's a wise idea to always go into with a 6-year-old all the various beliefs of a Mormon or an atheist and why that they're wrong, and explaining apologetics in depth. But it is an extremely wise idea to explain why to a 17-year-old why the Hindu neighbors believe in a Hindu version of reality, have a Hindu worldview, and what that means for them.
Mm-hmm. No, those are helpful points. That you don't have to give the lowdown, because then you say that to the small child, and then what they take from that, and then how they act on that. They don't have the level of discernment to process it. But
things could become really awkward in the neighborhood.
Right. But you can be more dialogic with, I don't know if that's a word or not, I may have just made one up, but you can have more dialogue with the older, prompting them, pushing them to think through that for themselves. And so.
Now, what kind of changes can our churches make to develop a healthy perspective on the lost?
Well, we have to remember the gospel. I mean, we're always in danger of assuming it or forgetting it, putting it aside. But, Ephesians 2, 8 to 10, 8 and 9 is really the heart of it. But, by grace are we saved through faith. It's not from ourselves. Also, not rail on the world around us. You talked about judging the church by a different standard than we judge the world. So we shouldn't be outraged and surprised completely when people who are lost and spiritually dead and under the power of the world, the flesh, and the devil act like they don't know God. I mean, we should expect it to, now sometimes certain things happen that are jarring, but, not to just to rail on them. Also, publicly praying for people who are lost with humility and with earnestness and love. And in the sermons, I think parts that address lost people directly, but address them respectfully and thoughtfully, but also with a compassion and a pleading with them to turn from their sin, helps inform. Like, as people see that happening from the pulpit, it helps to go, oh, okay, this is how we should interact. This is the kind of attitude, and that's more just from the leadership standpoint. But I think those are helpful.
I think for teachers, think of Sunday school teachers or youth ministry teachers. There's an importance of every time we teach, remembering that we deserve to be lost. Mm-hmm. That's what we deserve. We deserve eternity in hell every bit as much as anyone out there deserves eternity in hell. And likewise, to understand that just because you're in a Christian church with kids with good Christian values and maybe with a similar outlook on the world that you have, doesn't change the fact that some of your audience might be lost, and in fact, probably a lot more of your audience might be lost than you want to realize. And I think that's why we have to anticipate that. And then oftentimes I think we're surprised when so few people. We're surprised when people reveal themselves to be lost when they become young adults that were in our children and youth ministry. And I think a lot of times it's because we just assume. We assume that the good Christian kid and a good Christian church is going to, of course, be saved. There are people, rather than understanding that we by nature are all objects of wrath, and all of us have to be converted. All of us have to be regenerated. We don't come that way. We don't come prepackaged, regenerated. I think one last step, one practical thing that our church is doing this year that we're pretty excited about is this year on Halloween, and I've given my perspective on Halloween before, it will fall on a Wednesday night. And the Bible never says you have to have Wednesday night services, Wednesday night youth, or Wednesday night Awana or children's choir, whatever it might be. But we've decided that in order to be able to send our youth and our children and our families out into their neighborhoods for the gospel that night, where people are opening their doors to them, that night where people are coming to their doors, we're not going to have programming that night. Not as a way of just saying, oh, I want to get off the